Hi, I'm Andrew Holzman of Family Tree Counseling Associates. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and been working at Family Tree for over 20 years. We do lots of great videos and lots of great blogs at Family Tree. Our associates are highly knowledgeable. We also read what other people write. And so I read an interesting article by Chloe Madonis, who's an expert in her field, called 14 Habits of Highly Miserable People. And in that article, she was listing things like you ruminate about, stuff and worry. You kind of worry about your finances. You never try anything new. You give yourself a negative identity. All kinds of things that just keep you down in the dumps and keep you unhappy. So in reading that article, I thought, well, what about marriage? What's a way to talk about marriage? And so I thought of, well, what about 5 habits of a miserable marriage? And I wanted to list those for you and talk about them a little bit. The first one was if you're always in competition with your spouse. The second one was if you're always pushing closeness and intimacy. The third one would be if you're trying to provoke crises all the time. The fourth one is called splitting. And the fifth one is attributing bad intentions to your partner. So let me talk about those a little bit. Well, competition, everyone knows about competition, and if you're competing with your spouse as opposed to trying to get along, then you're always trying to be right, you're always trying to get the last word in, you're always trying to change the other person's mind, and I see that a lot in couples where they don't feel validated in their relationship, they don't feel that the other person's really hearing them, so they upping the ante all the time, and it seems like a competition. It may not be a competition in the normal sense of the word, but it seems like a competition to try to get your point across, to try to have the last word, try to, kind of get the person, convince the person, your partner, that is, convince your partner that you know what's right and what the way you see things are right. And that's a pretty difficult situation when both partners are doing that. The second one, pushing intimacy. Now that sounds like a good thing, intimacy. Intimacy is a wonderful thing, being close, being intimate, being physical, being emotionally, able to share things. But if your attitude is that you're going to get intimacy no matter what, and you're trying to push it on the other person, and then by doing that, you're criticizing that person. You're saying, well, you're not doing good enough, you're not intimate enough, you're not close enough, you're not a person who can be around either emotionally or physically. Well, what does that do? That pushes the other person further away, and they're going to retreat into their shell. So if you're pushing intimacy as opposed to kind of being intimate yourself, as opposed to criticizing the other person, but being intimate in a way where you're just doing what you need to do, and then sharing how that feels if you're not getting your needs met in a way that's not critical and judgmental, that's going to, that would be the better way to do it. But pushing it and saying, hey, I'm great and you're not, I'm intimate and you're never around, that's not going to work too well. Third way, provoking a crisis. Well, what happens if you're uncomfortable in the marriage, you're bored in the marriage? You may inadvertently or on purpose have an affair, eat too much, drink too much, spend too much, go on a shopping spree would provoke a crisis. There are ways that you can kind of blow up the safety and the comfort of the marriage. Certainly an affair would be the greatest example of that, where the person would be, just the other person would be in so much pain because you were betraying them, or you were hurting them, or you were going outside the vows of the marriage. So provoking a crisis, comes from being in pain in some ways, being hurting in some ways. Bored is another way of saying cut off and disconnected. So if you're disconnected and you provoke a crisis, you certainly get a little bit of excitement into the relationship, but negative excitement. So what's that? The fourth way is splitting, and splitting takes a little explanation. It just means that you view your partner as either all good or all bad. And if you're splitting, you're going to be disappointed because no one is all good or all bad. So that person is either the angel in the relationship or the devil in the relationship. And if you put them on a pedestal and they're wonderful and they're the angel, well, they're going to disappoint you and they're going to hurt you in some ways, just as normal course of events in a marriage. People are going to hurt each other. That's just normal in a relationship. There are ways that you will be disappointed and you will be frustrated. So if you're being that kind of person who's seeing someone as all good, or conversely as all bad, if they've really hurt you, they've had an affair, or they've broken up with you and they become the monster. A lot of couples come in and they're talking about like a former love or a former spouse, and that person is all bad. And no one is all bad. Both people have a responsibility in the relationship. So in the marriage, though, if you're really depending on this person to be there for you all the time and be perfect and be great all the time, and you have a dysfunctional view of how a relationship should really be, you're going to be disappointed. And then the splitting might happen where you're going to see the person as this terrible person, this bad person, when they're just being human. The fifth way, attributing bad intentions to your spouse. So you're always wanting to see that person in a negative light. You have trust issues that you're not admitting to, and you're worried about that person's fidelity, or you're worried about your abandonment issues are coming up and you're just can't handle them being away from you. So this is the kind of person who's going to start an argument as the person's leaving for work, or at night that goes until 3 in the morning, or calls the person up when they're out with friends, or comes over, or texts all the time, or phones them when they're with friends, just because their trust issues are so powerful, and they project those issues onto their spouse in ways that are just uncomfortable for the relationship, because the other person may have not done anything to warrant such lack of trust. And even if they have, the person who's projecting these issues or talking or dealing with these issues is ruminating all the time, is worrying all the time about what that other person might do. And so they try to control that person. They don't want them to go out with friends. They don't want them to be away. They don't want them to go on a business trip. They're scared and they're not admitting to their own feelings. And so you attribute those feelings because you're so enmeshed in this relationship. You attribute those feelings to your partner. So those are the 5 ways I thought of, and obviously those would create real issues in a marriage and make the marriage pretty dicey and pretty uncomfortable and unsafe. And so what we want to do is work on, when folks come into relationship therapy, we want to work on those vulnerability issues and those trust issues and those safety issues in ways that people can then talk about them without blowing up or shutting down. If they blow up, people are always fighting, they're not safe, if they're shut down, the possibility of creating that crisis to get some excitement back into the relationship might happen. If they're competing all the time, they're not listening to each other, not validating each other, if you're not feeling safe enough to let the person have some independence, obviously they're going to have independence, but not feeling safe enough to allow them time by themselves where they can have fun, then that relationship becomes a burden. So therapy is a lot about just putting those things on the table and talking about those things. But marriage can be a wonderful and unmiserable, if that's a word, a non-miserable relationship. And the habits of a good marriage would be the opposite of that, where you're not in competition, you're validating the person, you're talking, you're being open, you're not pushing something that you're not doing yourself, like intimacy. You're just being yourself and taking on and sharing your feelings that you're going through, and being able to hear what the other person is saying. Anyway, thank you for listening. My name again is Andy Holzman. My email is aholzman, Holzman 2 at Comcast.net, and my phone number is 317-457-8668. And thank you for listening again, and that's it.